Hi. Welcome to the fourth episode of our Africa Desk Talks, dedicated to the African Continental Free Trade Area. Our speakers today are Sophie Grainer and Christian Oleg, interviewed by Roberto Luci Crivellini. In this episode, they'll explain what is the African Continental Free Trade Area and how it works, how can non-African companies benefit from it, and the timeline for the next steps of integration of the African markets. Make sure you follow Legalmondo on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay updated on the next episodes of our Africa Desk.
Hi, Christian and Sophie. Welcome to this talk. This time at our Africa Desk at Legalmondo, we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area, which I believe is a project with a lot of value, very interesting for non-African companies. And so the idea is to have an overview of this project. And why don't you start off, Sophie, and tell us what it is to get started with?
Well, hello. Thank you, Roberto. The AfCFTA, how it is abbreviated, stands for African Continental Free Trade Area, and it is the first Pan-African trade area that exists. It is constituted it is constituted out of already existing regional trade areas. We already have 8 existing regional economic communities. They are abbreviated with RECs. And these are the building blocks of the AfCFTA.
Okay, thank you. And what is the role of non-African companies, and why is it interesting for instance, for those who are listening to our talk today from Germany or from Italy, let's say from outside the African continent?
Well, it is important to notice that the AfCFTA is the first Pan-African free trade agreement, and it is, after the WTO, the world's largest free trade agreement. It has a huge potential not only for African companies, but also for non-African companies. Non-African companies cannot directly benefit from it since they are not located in Africa. But you can, as a foreign company outside of Africa, you can locate a subsidiary, for example, in one African country and use it as the door to Africa. And then once the subsidiary is created, for example, in Egypt or Morocco, you could benefit from the preferential trade tariff, or also from the rules of origin, which will help you to have an easier access to the whole African market.
So when did the agreement start, Sophie?
The negotiations for the agreement already started 30 years ago, but the countries couldn't agree on the exact content of the AfCFTA, since there were already existing regional economic communities with their own treaties, with their own with their own treaties on how to trade within the regional communities. So it took them several years until finally 2015, the Agenda 2063 came out, and the African Union really pushed this treaty forward. And finally, in 2019, the AfCFTA had enough country signatories to finally enter into force. Due to the COVID crisis, the starting date has been postponed to 2021, and on 4th of January, the first preferential trade finally took place under the treaty.
I see. And what are the next steps? So what's the timeline for the evolution of the agreement, or what is the expected timeline, at least?
The negotiations are still going on. There are several phases. We are talking about 3 phases at the moment. The first phase was eliminating most of the tariff barriers and the non-tariff barriers. Today, we have 46 signatories that can already trade under the preferential trade agreement. But we are still far from having all the agreement negotiated. We still need to find an agreement on the preferential services, For example, qualifications of universities that would be recognized in other African countries, or also what would also still need to be negotiated is how services can be rendered in another African countries. For the moment, it is about completing the agreement on uniform tariffs.
I see. And so, compared to the common market we have in the European Union, when this is fully negotiated in force, what will be the main difference?
The main difference between the European Union, you mean?
Yes,
Yes.
the common market within the European Union and the agreement when it's final and in place.
Well, both are a free trade agreement, but the Pan-African trade area is a preferential trade agreement. It's not a customs union like it is the case for the EU. The customs union means that countries come together and they agree on of a common customs customs rules applying to third countries outside of the European Union, for example. Within the AfCFTA, this is not the case. So each country still keeps their own tariffs towards non-African countries.
Well, that's clear.
The long-term plan of the African Continental Free Trade Area is to create a single market. This is, of course, it's a long-term project, and in order to kick off with the agreement that has been enforced since 2021, the first 8 states, including Egypt, have gathered and are participating in a guided trade initiative in order to start with the procedure, because a lot of African countries, of course, have no experience and they need to start off with something, and that is an initiative of the free trade area that has commenced just recently in order for the countries to start gaining some experience. What's interesting about the free trade area is that it has the aim is to go away from selling all the raw materials that Africa has. Africa has a lot of raw materials that Chinese companies are buying, and other non-African countries are buying to produce in their own countries. The idea is to have products, or to give an initiative to produce in Africa, made in Africa. You have the raw materials, you have the market, 1.3 billion people on the African continent. There's a lot of potential for many companies, non-African companies, in the market. And the initiative is also for non-African companies to enter the African market and to invest by setting up subsidiaries, by trading with their products, bringing technology transfer, and it is recommendable for non-African countries to set up within the area an own subsidiary or manufacturing plant to get enough experience on the ground. So it's much easier to expand your business once you are in the free trade area, be it Egypt, be it South Africa, Morocco, or any other African country. And the opportunities that we see for the industry is in the automobile sector, leather sector, cacao, soya, textile, pharmaceuticals. Vaccine manufacturing is a big issue. As you have heard, BioNTech is setting up manufacturing companies for vaccines. In Africa, lithium, batteries, and mobile financial services. Big topic in Africa, just as in India, it's picking up immensely. So these are just some of the sectors where we would say there's a big opportunity for non-African countries to invest.
I see. Very interesting, Christian. And I think we can tie to the other episodes of our Africa Talks, where we discussed how to set up a company in Egypt and Morocco. If for those who want to know more about the startup or direct investment in the area, as you mentioned, those might be good helps together with South Africa to start your presence in the area. Would you have any final remark to wrap up this chat and while we wait for the development of the agreement and of the next stages?
Yeah, I would like to add a few facts to illustrate how important the AfCFTA is actually for the African continent. Until today, we have high intra-African tariffs, but we also have non-tariff barriers such as weak infrastructure, corruption, cumbersome bureaucracy, non-transparent regulations. And just to illustrate this, the average border waiting time in Europe, not the EU, but Europe as a continent, is around 8 hours. Now guess how high it is in Africa. It is 97 hours. It is no wonder that until today, the interregional export rate in Africa is stagnating at 17%. And if we take notice that the continent is rich in fertile soils and raw materials, by 2050, 1 in 4 newborns in Africa will be 1 of 4 newborns will be African, and more than 50% of Africa's population is under 20 years old. We really have a huge potential, and the AfCFTA aims to eliminate the non-tariff barriers and the high intra-African tariffs, and wants to make use of this huge potential. So I can only say that it is a very interesting development of the African economy, and we need to follow this closely because it is a continent that is right next to the European continent, which not only holds a huge potential for the continent itself, but also for the European continent.
Well, thank Christian.
I just want to give a final word. Sophie said it all, actually, but I just want anyone listening to this conversation should also know that the big difference between this free trade area and the European Union is that there is, until now, the countries have not committed to free labor movement, which I think is a very important issue. There are countries up to 30, as I understand, who are ready to implement such a scheme into the free trade area, but not all of them have accepted that yet. So we will see in the near future how this will develop. It will definitely be very interesting, and also I think promotes also trade initiatives and investments in the African continent.
Okay, thanks a lot. It was very interesting. I look forward to developments on this topic, and well, I'll see you soon for the other talks we have already in the pipeline for our Africa desk. Bye bye.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Roberto. Bye bye.
Bye.